Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first Become Your Own Best Friend class. I'm really, really excited that each of you has chosen to show up in this way for yourself and then for everybody in your world. I think this is such an important topic that impacts so many of us that it's really becoming quite pervasive, and I would actually call it an epidemic, the lack of taking care of ourselves. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody about self-care today, and they were saying, well, I feel like I eat pretty well and I, make sure I exercise 5 times a week, but there's this deeper sense of what it means to, really love on yourself and really take good care of yourself. And sometimes that involves a workout or a great meal or whatever, pedicure or a massage, but not always. A lot of times it means something a little bit different. So that's what we're going to dive into tonight. And like I said earlier, any questions at any time, feel free to just jump in, or you can raise your hand. And then if you are on a computer, you can use the chat icon, which is going to be in the bottom of your little black box from the Zoom meeting. So I'll kind of keep an eye on that as well. So before we jump in, let's go ahead and close our eyes. Just take a few deep belly breaths here. And just bringing your awareness to the inhale and the exhale. Really letting go of any effort of the breath. Allowing your breath to find a natural rhythm. And then as you let go of any effort, allow yourself to release any expectations of tonight, of this class, of yourself. And just call in that part of you who's curious and open-hearted. Calling in that part of you who chose to sign up for this course. And then really taking a few moments to set an intention for this call for you. And we'll touch into this intention throughout the call, and really throughout, all our time together and probably beyond. Touching into why you've chosen this experience for yourself at this time. And taking as much time as you need here. Whenever that feels complete, you can go ahead and open your eyes. A little self-care for myself there. When I start teaching, I get really hot, so I just turned off my heater. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I went ahead and muted everybody. If you want to talk or ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself at any time, or go ahead and write something in the chat box for those of you guys who are just jumping in. So now that we've done a few grounding breaths, I just want to talk a little bit about, what is unconditional love? And I'm actually really curious to hear, when you hear that that's what we're talking about tonight, what does that bring up for you? And what does that mean? Because it's it feels like a very elusive thing, this idea of loving without condition. Most of us have been trained into an understanding or conceptualization of love that requires parameters and expectations and a give and take. Many of us enter into love relationships and friendships or even family relationships with an expectation that I'll take care of you if you then in return take care of me. And so that in and of itself is a condition, or that I have to show up and perform or be or do in a certain way in order to earn or be worthy of love. And so this idea of unconditional love, as I've been thinking about this a lot over the past number of weeks, is really more about just having radical acceptance for yourself first, for everything that comes in any moment. Because as we can radically accept it, why I say radically is because most of us are willing to accept most stuff, but it gets harder and harder to accept the icky parts, the anxious parts, the angry parts that we all possess from time to time, if not pretty regularly. And so those are the parts that get harder and harder to accept and that we start fighting against, because somewhere along the line we were told that that was not okay. Most of us began being corrected by our parents, by our culture, by our society, by our teachers, by our siblings at a very, very young age. Most of us can think about or even if a very, very small baby, who's maybe pre-mobile or maybe just starting to crawl around, and he or she just thinks she's amazing. Her toes are amazing. His reflection in the mirror is amazing. His laugh begets more laughter, and it just creates more and more and more. But somewhere around 2, 3, 4, when we start exploring our world, we realize that there's things that we can do that make people mad, that require reprimanding, that get redirected, and that we start kind of shutting down that unconditional love that we're actually all born into this world with, this sense that, wow, I'm awesome. And again, I think the easiest reflection of that is a baby that you would see on the street who's totally self-contained, not worried about anybody else around them, and having a pretty good time most of the time, just being in their own little bubble. And so I just want to offer that to you first, because I want you to know that unconditional love isn't something that you work towards, you strive for. It's your birthright. It's just something that's available to you when you are ready and willing to choose it, and realize that you are worthy of it as is right now in this very moment, that you are completely and utterly worthy of unconditional love from yourself and then from everybody else in your world. And hopefully that awareness that unconditional love is actually your birthright and not something that you have to work really hard to earn all the gold stars to save up enough to get, but that it's just something that you deserve just because you're showing up. Because really, I was doing a lot of reading about love, and it's very hard to describe this bigger sense of love, but a lot of people describe it as a sense of connectedness, or a sense of being a spiritual being and having a human experience. This idea that once we connect into love, it transcends all of the other kind of smaller pieces that get in the way, be it day-to-day stressors or relationship strains or self-doubt and anxieties, things like that. So that's kind of my understanding about self-love and unconditional love. And I'd love to, if there's anybody who wants to jump in and kind of share what their understanding is about unconditional love, and maybe whether or not you think that's attainable or something that's available to you, because I'm curious about where, because it lands differently for different people, and I think it's certainly landing differently for me today than it's landed for me in years past, when I wasn't so aware of my own inherent worth. And I know these webinar calls can be a little funny to jump in and participate, so if you're not feeling it, that's okay, but I'd love to kind of have a little dialogue and a little tea. Okay. I'll keep going then. Feel free to jump in at any time. So, what I want to talk about a little bit is this idea that it's not you that feels like you're worthless and a failure or less than. It's really that judgment that comes in, and that judgment is what makes love feel like it's conditional. If I show up in this way, that's how I get love. Or if I perform this act, then that's how I get praise. And many of us learned that in childhood, that, unless we acted and conformed to a certain cultural norm, that we weren't going to get acknowledgement. Or maybe we had parents that weren't able to acknowledge who we were and love us in our gifts. Maybe some of our gifts and special talents were seen as not that. We're seen as difficult or something to be corrected. And so here we are in our brilliance. And, again, I kind of go back to these, toddlers who are just in their own little worlds and, playing their imaginary games and making loud noises, and the difference that happens when that creativity and self-expression is nurtured versus kind of squashed down and reprimanded or told that it doesn't fit into the right box. And so we get very, very nervous about expressing ourselves, because if you think about when you were really, really little, you were dependent on your parents or your caretakers for your survival. And so if you did something that was displeasing to your parent or your parent figure, then it became a matter of life and death for a little kid, because if you're 2 and 3, the chances of you surviving on your own are very, very small. And so it becomes one of those things where either there's something wrong with our parent and our parent isn't giving us what we need, or there's something wrong with us and we just haven't figured out how to get our needs met yet. And for the vast majority of us, that's the path that we choose, is this idea that we are not worthy and that we have to now really push and work and earn our way back into getting that love and that nurturing that we really need. Now, this isn't to say that we need to start parent bashing here. All of us had different experiences in our childhood and very different experiences of being parented. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there was trauma or abuse in your history, and maybe there was. But realizing that even if you had a parent who wasn't necessarily doing anything super negative or wasn't super harsh or abusive in some way, their parenting style and your love language might not have met up. And so that can cause the disconnect and can trigger our ego systems into strategies to getting those needs met, because maybe the needs that you had, your parent didn't have the skill set to meet that need in a way that really resonated for you, and there was just a miss. Or maybe there was something more dynamic going on in that family relationship where your parent wasn't able to really show up for you in the way that made you feel safe and cared for. And so we develop these really complex strategies, and our inner critic really starts coming in strong at that point. Because really, if you break down an inner critic, the reason you go over and over and over a mistake again and again is because that critic, that perfectionist, is trying to prevent you from making that same mistake or a similar mistake in the future. And so he or she is actually really trying to prevent future suffering. However, our brain is designed to kind of review mistakes once or twice. So we learn the lesson, got it, and move on. But when we start getting into this worthiness piece, what happens is we start reviewing those mistakes dozens, hundreds, if not thousands of times, because there's such an emotional trauma component to it that we just can't quite loop out of what we're trying to do here. And so that's where we get caught in that constant analysis of what we did, what we said, our conversation, our actions, our choices, or who we are as people, or who we've partnered with, or even if we're in the midst of making a decision. Maybe we make a decision, and then as soon as you make that decision, the tape starts playing around how that's not the right decision. So then you flip-flop and you choose part B, and then all of a sudden all the reasons that part B aren't right, and so we can get caught up in this really intense cycle of self-analysis and criticism and doubt. But if we can slow down to realize that critic is actually here to make sure that we make the right decision and we don't suffer and we don't make a mistake again, then we can actually show up with compassion for that part of us, that critic part. And I don't know about you, but if your critic is as harsh as mine can be at times, but you're like, I am not finding any compassion for that critic. But when we soften and realize that the critic, him or herself, is actually really anxious themselves, that we can show up and go, oh, honey, I'm so sorry that you're so worried about doing it right, or that you're so concerned about making a mistake, or you're working so hard to prevent me getting hurt in the future. Thank you for that. And you can show up in a heart space for that perfectionist part of you, that can be really, really transformative in taking care of yourself in a whole different light, which is really, really powerful and really important. So that's kind of one of the first steps in cultivating this idea of unconditional love, is taking the time to be reflective with yourself and to create space to go into your inner world and see what's there. Because most of us spend the vast majority of our time avoiding that place, those dark places, those inner sanctuaries that we retreat to, because we're afraid, to be totally honest. We're worried about what's going to be contained there. We're worried about being overwhelmed by the emotions we've been putting to the side. Again, grief, anger, worry, shame, guilt, you name it, it's all there. Sadness is another one that we work really hard. So we get really, really busy and really productive, and we get our to-do list together and we keep on plowing forward, but we're not taking time to cultivate an understanding and a relationship with our inner workings to find, wow, I'm really scared of failing, or I'm really pushing myself hard to create this amazing weekend for visitors that are coming into town, because that's the only reason that they're going to love me, or that's what we make up in our head. But when we start connecting into those underlying truths, we can, or underlying stories, I guess I should say, or truths that we convince ourselves are true. But if we don't actually examine them, we can really actually believe that they're true, and that can drive a lot of our behavior, and certainly a lot of our emotion, a lot of that pressure, and can certainly get in the way of, you know what, no matter what happens, no matter if the dinner is a flop and gets totally burned and we have to order takeout and somebody can't, hates Chinese food or whatever, that's not why they're visiting, and that's not going to be dependent on whether or not they're going to love you at the end of the day. But until we can show up with more compassion for that underlying voice, it's going to be really, really hard to shift that pattern. And so the first step then is to make some quiet time every single day to reflect on what's going on, or simply touch into your emotional space. Wow, I'm really tender about this. For me, I use a cue. My irritability is a great cue for me to slow down and take a deep breath. And when I get tight and irritable, especially with my husband, I've noticed that this comes up the most with him, probably because I feel very safe with him. But when I am getting irritable and kind of shut down around him, it's a really strong cue for me to take 5 or 10 or 15 minutes by myself and not actually engage in conversation, which, can sometimes lead to argument when I'm, irritated or triggered. And so I use that as a moment. You know what, can you give me 5 or 10 minutes, or I'm going to go and take a walk or take a shower, just go do something else and touch into what's really coming up for me. And I'll tell you, I actually did this on Sunday. We kind of had a miscommunication and just paused the conversation, and I literally went and took a shower. And in the shower, I just kind of held onto my chest, like, okay, what's really going on here for you? And that clarity came through, and I was able to come back upstairs, and it was less than 20 minutes later, and say, hey, this is really what's happening for me. I'm worried about, I'm worried about this relationship, kind of blooming and blossoming, and, but this is how this is all tied together, because I pulled 2 pieces that were related for me, and he was like, I don't understand how these are even related, and I couldn't explain it to him until I took some time. And so again, just that daily reflection is really, really, really important to start cultivating this direct line of communication, so that we're not acting out of anger or resentment or hurt or fear, and that we can actually make really conscious choices around how we want to show up in the world and how we want to communicate. But it was impossible for me to explain to him how these 2 incidences were related, And I was actually really upset about this whole deeper piece that he was like, where is this even coming from? Because I hadn't been communicating it, because I hadn't really honestly taken the time to put together all the dots, but I knew I was irritated and somehow it was his fault. But, you know, again, just taking a few moments away, I was able to see, like, this isn't actually his fault. This is a big red button of mine that gets pushed, and I'm linking all of these events together. And so we were able to actually have a super productive conversation about it. But that started because I was willing to go there, and I was willing to recognize my cue of being irritated as something not to hold on to and fight strongly for, but actually to as a cue to be more self-investigative, if that's a word. We'll go with it, and take some time to really, you know, kind of get quiet. And this is something that I think is important to do every single day. And I think what prohibits a lot of us from going there is that we're afraid that if we touch into these emotions that we've either, you know, kind of pushed away or neatly packaged and put away, or that we run from, that we're going to get overwhelmed by whatever we are essentially running from. And that's where the boogeyman has his power, right? Is the power that he has over this, you know, the small kid who's in the bed, woke up, heard a noise, and is sitting in bed terrified, and the covers are pulled over, and no matter what, please don't open the closet door, please don't open the closet door. But then the adult, ideally, comes into the room and says, it's going to be okay, I'll take good care of you, and opens the closet door. But that moment where the hand is on the doorknob, be it in real life or in a horror film or whatever, you're like, oh my God, it's the worst part. And then the door opens and the parent or the adult shines the flashlight into the closet, under the bed, and you realize, and the kid realizes, oh, there's actually nothing there, or whatever it wasn't nearly as bad as what I was making up in my head. But that's the power that fear has, is in our unwillingness to stand and turn around and look at what we've been running from. But we're running from it because we're petrified that it's going to take over our whole person. And so that would be something else that can really come from coming more internal, rather than external, like, oh, I need to read this book or do this meditation or take this course or whatever, because these are all tools that can help us. But ultimately, you have the answers that are going to be the most effective solution for whatever the problem du jour is. And so, because kind of cultivating that trust within yourself, and the more you come back to yourself, the deeper that trust is, and the more confidence you can have in your knowing. And then that translates to how you show up in the world, which then translates into how people respond to you. If you have an inner confidence, I mean, we all know people who are confident, not braggarts or, you know, boastful, but just have a, you know, kind of quiet sense of confidence, versus people who are very insecure, and you know that you can relate to them a little bit differently. Same goes true, is that we are teaching people around us how to take care of us by how we show up in the world, for ourselves. And so I think that's another important piece too. I'm going to actually read this little quote that I found. It says, "We seek our truth and become it." And this is by going within. "We honor the truth of others and allow each person the same freedoms we aspire to. As we expand, the world expands." And so I think that's really important to consider and remember, because I think a lot of us are a little bit nervous about taking time for ourselves all the time, because we think it's selfish, or that we won't be showing up for other people anymore. And that's simply not true. You know, the more that you can show up and step into your light, the more light you cast around for everybody around you, and the more you create a space for everyone to expand. I think a fear is, if I step into a bigger space, then I'm going to be elbowing out other people and boxing them out, and, you know, kind of like taking up, this is my space now. But the reality of it is that there's infinite space, and there's infinite energy, and there's infinite resources for all of us. You know, I've been thinking about money actually lately, and was thinking about how many American dollars are in circulation, and the relative deficiency of gold bullion that we have to back that up. And what I realize is that this is all a construct, and that there isn't such thing as finite money. There's infinite resources, because we just keep printing more and none of it really means anything. And so it's the difference. Like if you think that you're swimming in a swimming pool, and it's kind of like, okay, I've got to stake out my area of the swimming pool because there's boundaries, there's limits on this, right? And so if there's treasures in the swimming pool, well, then I got to grab as many treasures as I can and put them over in my corner. Versus if you realize that you're swimming in the ocean, and it just keeps going and going and going and going and going, and that there is infinite resources contained within, and hidden treasures that we didn't even know existed until we dive in. But the difference is the swimming pool tends to be really, really flat surfaced and very calm to enter, right? So it's like kind of a more contained environment. Whereas the ocean, it's a little rocky as we're getting in, and until we really fully dive in, we can be pushed around by the waves until we allow ourselves to surrender all the way. And then we realize we can swim for days and days and days and days, and that there's plenty of room in the ocean for everybody. And so all of a sudden we can kind of reframe how we are looking at the world, and this idea that if I take up more space, then that means there isn't enough space for everybody else, which is completely and utterly false. The more room and the more light that you shine, the more you encourage other people to grow big and shine their big lights too. So you spending more time with yourself actually creates infinite opportunity, not only for you, but for everybody else in your circle, and everybody else outside of your circle too, because you're starting to cultivate that energy and call it in. Are there any questions thus far? Okay, we'll just keep rambling on. So we talked a little bit about, I just kind of wanted to, I'll write some of these steps out for everybody. And I'm kind of, when I teach, I kind of jump around. But one thing is connecting with your inner world. Another is to honestly face your truth. And so what I mean by that, and that's part of going into the inner world, and part of the reason why so many of us don't want to go there, is because we don't really want to honestly face our resistances, our shames, our doubts, our wounds. And so if we're able to cultivate this daily practice of just touching in, and it doesn't mean you have to go there and revisit something horribly traumatic unless it's here, but just touching in and saying, hey, I love you, and I'm right here for you. And just telling yourself that every day, that you don't have to deny these wounded parts of yourselves or even fix them, that it's okay to simply show up for them and welcome them as is. You're welcome to be here no matter what. And realizing that most of our anxieties and insecurities are leftover hurts from past events. And so it doesn't necessarily define who we are, but when we touch into those past events and simply presence them with more resources that we now have, because you have educated yourself and read books and done seminars and whatever other personal growth and transformational work that you've done, now you show up with a totally different toolbox than you had when you were 5 or 15 or even 30. And so, we can revisit these past experiences with deep presence and compassion and transmute them like that. And that it can release those old cellular patterns from the system, so that it's not going to be as likely to cause dis-ease or imbalance in the physical body, or certainly in the mental, emotional, or spiritual bodies too. So again, kind of using that check-in with your internal environment as a roadmap for what's really going on, to help you respond to situations rather than react. It's really important to understand, oh, that's why I got so irritated. Like on Sunday, I was like, why am I so irritated? Like, I am so irritated right now, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But unless I'm more in touch with my internal environment, it's hard for me to cue into that in the moment. I just get to make my husband wrong all day long, and then I get to apologize to him later and make up for it. But again, kind of in this new way of being, which I'm still learning and growing into, we get to use those cues because now we're more attuned to the weather report of our own system. Another kind of variation on that same theme is this idea of dealing with old resentments and hurts. And not that you necessarily need to jump into forgiveness and letting go, because I don't know if you saw my post last week on Facebook, but I did a little rant about this idea of just let it go, because that's not easy to do. And if we knew how to just let it go, we probably would, and we'd probably move on. And it's simply not that easy to just let something go. But I think, when I do the work, my one-on-one work with people, and maybe this will be something that comes up for us here and during our process together, is when we actually slow down and touch into what's happening in our emotional body, that it's shocking how many old hurts or resentments that we're holding on to, stuff that we thought we had gotten over or should have gotten over by now because it happened 30 years ago, but only to find out that, wow, I'm still carrying this, or wow, that event that happened is still really prominent in my life. And again, it's not that we have to, you can't change it, it's what happened, but we can be in relationship to it a little bit differently. It's kind of like if you had a friend or a partner that you broke up with, but maybe it was a messy ending of that relationship or friendship, and every time you kind of dread bumping into them. We live in a small town, those of us who live in the Four Corners area, so that can be a big part of this, is like, oh, I don't want to see so and so, and dreading bumping into them. But sometimes we end up bumping into them, and then we have some sort of resolution or some sort of conversation, and all of a sudden it just releases all those big feelings and hurts and energies that we've been holding on, can simply resolve simply by presencing the fact that it's still here. And so it's really important to just kind of take a little inventory about what's still here. And if you're able to forgive those pieces, then that's great in others. But what's more important is that you bring forgiveness into yourself. And so that you offer yourself forgiveness for your part, for your reaction, because that's so important, so much more important than forgiving the other person. And sometimes we're invited to forgive somebody else, and they've done something really hard for us. It's hard for us to get over, and that's not necessarily where we're at in this moment, and that's okay. But you can always forgive yourself for your part in it, or for not protecting yourself, or speaking up, or reacting differently, or choosing that situation in the first place. And so I'll give you a little exercise. I'm going to write this down so don't forget to do it, but at the end of this, to practice, because I think that would be really, really helpful. And for me, this idea of forgiveness, I think a lot of people get turned off by forgiveness because they think that it's kind of in some way telling the other person, either in your own person, or telling them directly that whatever happened is okay and you're okay with it now. And I'm here to tell you that is not what I kind of conceptualize as forgiveness. And so what I've come to understand about forgiveness is that it's really more about letting go of the hope of a different past. So I think a lot of us get stuck in a past incident because we wish it was different, or we think about how it could have been different, or what it would have been, what our life would have been like now if that choice was different back then. And so for me, it's really more about letting go of hoping for a different past than saying, hey, whatever happened, is okay. It just means that we've been able to presence the hurt that was created and hold and nurture ourselves in that process. And then, eventually that releases from the system. But that's not something that can be pushed or forced by any means, but maybe because at least starting with the awareness of like, wow, I'm still holding on to this. Why was that so important to me? What was so poignant about that for me? What button of mine, insecurity of mine did that push? And how does that play out in my relationships in my life now? So again, that kind of coming back to that first offering of checking in with your internal environment, because the more you understand what's actually happening inside, then the more you can show up with compassion. Oh, you poor thing, you're still hurting about that thing from high school. it's like, then you can show up for yourself and be like, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And she can go, oh, thanks, you know, rather than going, oh my God, you're so stupid. I can't believe you're still upset about that thing. It happened in high school. And she's like, eek, you know, you're doing the same thing to me that happened back then. And then we kind of get into the patterns of actually doing those things to ourselves. And that gets in the way of unconditional love in a huge way. And so I can remember I was with a therapist, or working with a therapist personally, and this is probably the third therapist that I had worked with, and we had been working together for quite some time, and then something from my family of origin story came back up again, and I literally was like, rolled my eyes at the top of my head, and I was like, really? This shit again? Like, seriously, Michael, are we going to go over this again? And he's like, roll your eyes all you want, but if this is what's here, this is what's here. And that has stuck with me for years, because I did get really kind of just frustrated and impatient with myself. Like, I've spent many, many hours and many, many dollars and many, many candles and smudge sticks on kind of moving through this. And it's annoying that this is still the thing that's coming up today. And so, yeah, great. Let yourself have that like experience, and then presence yourself, because it's, for whatever reason, it's here again. And it's just another invitation to show up for ourselves with deep, deep, deep compassion and understanding. So we touched a little bit about the Sephora's idea of radical acceptance, and how important it is to simply allow yourself to be wherever you're at. And that's why I say, if you think about something from the past and, okay, great, I want to forgive that person or that situation, and I'm just not there, like, don't push yourself into being there. I had a conversation with a patient earlier today about a wellness practice that used to be really important in her life that she's kind of let go. And she's like, yeah, you know what, I need to get back on that. That would be really good for me. And I was like, well, but are you actually really there right now to want to do yoga, you know, 3 times a week during your lunch hour? And she's like, not really, but I know it would be good for my breathing and open my lungs and all this sort of stuff. And so we kind of push ourselves to be somewhere that we're not authentically living. And so I think that's something that we do all the time, is devalue where we're at right now because we should be somewhere else. And so, you know, like, something as silly as like a workout schedule. Some days I feel like going to the gym, and some days I just don't. And I have complete fluidity in my exercise routine because I don't like forcing myself to go do something anymore. It doesn't feel good, and it really doesn't ever serve me. And so I think if you can just take a few moments here and think about some of those places in your world where you maybe where you push yourself to be somewhere that you're not authentically, and how, you know, what might be driving that, and kind of could we back out of that and just accept, okay, today is not the day for that, but I could do this instead. Or I feel inspired to, you know, cook a big pot of soup instead of going and moving my body. Great. Or I feel inspired to take a walk and look at the leaves turning colors rather than being inside in the gym. Awesome. You know, or I'm not ready to forgive this person, but, you know, may I be able to do so in the future, and just really just nurture and nourish yourself all along the way. And, you know, once you recognize an old pattern, like I'll use my irritability as an old pattern because it's an old one with me and it's still with me. But rather than getting stuck in that old pattern, I can stop and say, you know what, I don't want to bicker anymore. That's an old operating system, and I choose to upgrade my system. And so rather than getting down on myself for being irritable again, I can actually use that as an opportunity to upgrade my whole system and say, nope, that's an old belief, that's a limiting belief, that's an old way of doing things. I choose to do it like this. I choose to be in more authentic, more vulnerable communication with my partner, rather than getting into blaming, irritable conversation. And so that can be really helpful too. And just like when you upgrade your phone or your computer and you turn it off for the night, you turn it on in the morning, and woof, you got the next operating system. It's just there for you as soon as you say, yes, that's what I want. And so that's how quickly we can transmute old energies in our system as well. It's really about making a strong choice that this is no longer how I want to be and want to show up in the world. And so I choose different. And so you can just kind of remind yourself when you find yourself in an old pattern again, you know what, this isn't what I choose. I'm going to go ahead and upgrade my system. And it's just a really light way of kind of leaving those past patterns behind, because they do tend to show up time and time again, even after we've decided, you know what, no more negative self-talk. I'm going to be really, really kind to myself and accept where I am in this moment. And then tomorrow there's a little bit of negative self-talk, and it's like, wait, nope, that's not what I'm doing anymore, and bring in more of what you do want to do. Last couple of things I wanted to touch base about tonight is this idea of cultivating relationships where you feel loved and appreciated, because that's not always the case. And I think oftentimes we maintain relationships with friends or families or partners or work where we are not really loved and appreciated, but we hold on to them because they're familiar, or they meet a certain need that we have, or we don't know how to get out of them, or we're afraid of hurting somebody's feelings by stepping away from a certain situation. And so an invitation I have for you over the next few days is you kind of do a relationship inventory, and where are the places where you get stuck, or who are the people that drain you? Who are the people that fill you up and are really your cheerleader? Who are the people that you tend to take a lot of care of? And are you expecting that care to be returned? And is there a resentment building there if it's not returned in that way? Because love is, unconditional love is really something that when we cultivate in ourselves, we're so much more able to share with everybody in our world. But it can be really hard to do that in an authentic way. Especially if we're not doing it for ourselves first. So I guarantee you, if we're not cultivating that unconditional love for ourselves, then we're going to show up in this kind of more enmeshed love in the other relationships in our life, because we don't know what it is to just be in full acceptance. And then when someone in your world shows up in their full brilliance, whatever that looks like, rather than be judgy and critical and kind of rejecting of how they're showing up, you can accept it fully and then make your decision from there. You may not want to be involved with it anymore, but it doesn't mean that you have to try to correct what's going on. We can find a lot more space for that. Another question as far as relationship inventory goes are you spending time with people that you feel like you can be totally authentic with? Or are there some people in your life where you feel like you have to hold back parts of yourself or your full truth? And then I guess a follow-up question to that would be, are you holding yourself back because of how the other person might receive you, or how you're afraid that they might perceive you? Because more often than not, we are hesitant to share our full selves with somebody else because we are scared to death that they might reject us or abandon us or judge us or use it against us. And so just kind of putting your toes in the water, checking that out, and maybe sharing a little bit more of yourself with someone who means a lot to you, that you realize you've been holding these pieces back of you, and to see what happens. And you'll know if there's someone who can hold space for that. But I guarantee you, more often than not, you'll be surprised at how much connectedness and intimacy it creates between you and the person you are more authentic with. Trust me on this one. I know that one probably feels a little bit scary. And then the last thing I wanted to touch base about is just the idea of the importance of practicing loving yourself in the way that you wish to be loved. Because you really can't expect someone to love icky parts of you, like, okay, I'm gonna not love these, you love those parts, and then I'll take the icky parts of you and I'll love these parts, and then we'll be in this dance of just taking care of each other's wounded parts. And that's where so many of us come into relationship and friendship, or even family dynamics, where there's an expectation of this quid pro quo, like, I'll take care of your garbage, you take care of my garbage because it's too stinky for me. But the reality of it is if you claim your full self, and are willing to be in full acceptance of even those icky, dark, pieces that we tend to judge and hide and, kind of cover up and pretend like doesn't exist and never take a picture and post it on Facebook about, that nobody else is actually going to really be willing to love you either, because you are signaling somebody else like how to treat you. And so, excuse me. So we really, excuse me, we really want to be careful here that we are teaching other people, like, every part of me is lovable and is okay, and that there's a safety net here now because I love myself. And so if I try something new and I fall on my face, it doesn't have that huge consequence anymore, because I am okay. At the end of the day, I'm still okay. Okay, we've got a question here. I'm confused when you say to honestly face your truth and then say choose to upgrade and make better choice to not do that pattern, but that's not my truth. It seems like another setup for how I'm worthless and hopeless. Okay, that's a great question. So I think where we're getting a little bit, I'm reading the question again, hung up is, so I think it's really important to honestly face your truth and be exactly where you want to be. Exactly where you are. And I'm just trying to think about, okay, so if we talk about an example of, kind of being self-critical, we can notice and be honest and authentic about the fact that we're being really hard on ourselves. But that may not be how we want to be in the future. And so, we can just kind of catch that pattern and say, okay, this is a pattern that I've had of beating myself up, and I'm not going to choose to do that anymore. And so, and then an hour later, you catch yourself beating yourself up again, and you kind of come back. That's okay. And, you're not getting hard on yourself, but, that's not a pattern that I choose anymore, and kind of put it to the side. And so I think that's kind of what I meant, because and I guess this kind of gets more into the parts work too, this idea that there's a part of me that's beating myself up, and there's a part of me that knows I deserve love. And so when we talk about truth with a capital T, I think it can get really confusing, because our mind is so very good at convincing us that there's only one answer. Like, if you are being critical to yourself or hard on yourself, that rather than saying there's a part of me that beats up on me pretty good, you just say, I am super self-critical. But that implies that all of you is like that, and that's simply not true. There are parts of you that know that you're worthy, that are craving something different, that signed up for this course, that have, wanting to explore that relationship. And so I think if we can start teasing out, okay, there's a part of me that's critical, and there's a part of me that wants to choose something different. I think that can be a more full truth, that there's a spectrum of perspectives. Does that help clear things up? Answer your question? Just waiting. Okay. Oh, okay, great. Yes, thank you. You're welcome. Thanks for asking the question. That was a brilliant question, and really, it's just this is what happens to us, right? Is that it's like, okay, now I've got a new tool and I have to use it perfect, otherwise I'm going to just continue on this pattern of being worthless and hopeless and never going to get any better, or never going to change how I think, or never going to be kinder to myself, or I'm never going to get to this ethereal place of unconditional self-love. Whereas, it's one of these things where we find it where we can, and we continue to just start recognizing it, like, oh, I did a good job making my breakfast this morning, or I took 3 seconds before I came into my office to notice the leaves change today. It's kind of like well, I don't know about you guys, but it's been a rough, kind of year or two in our culture, in our American society, for a variety of reasons. It feels like there's people are really just polarizing, and I'm not trying to get political here, but I feel like people are really polarizing, and then there's just a lot more angst and fighting that's happening. And so, I've heard a lot of people feeling pretty stressed out and angsty and feeling like there isn't much beauty and kindness in the world right now. And my response to that is it's still the same. You can still see a sunset or appreciate a cloud formation in the sky, or again, like watch the leaves change. Sorry, it's what I keep coming back to because it's a big part of what my practice these days is, just kind of noticing that. So it's not like the world has to be beautiful 24/7, every second of the day, in order for there to be beauty in the world. So there can be beauty in the world and strife in the world, and those are both true at the same time. But for our intellectual mind, that's kind of like we kind of get like that gear kind of stops to realize that there can be two wildly variant truths going on at the same time. Like, I love myself and I can't stand myself. And how are those coexisting? But again, the more we check in, the more we realize that they usually are co-occurring, and that the part of us that hates ourselves or thinks that we're worthless is the part that really is, in a roundabout kind of twisty sort of way, trying to keep us safe by not putting us out there, by not making us vulnerable, and then we don't ever have to get hurt again. Does that kind of resonate? Does that make sense? Okay. If it doesn't, shoot me a chat or hop on the call. You guys are welcome to jump in here anytime. Okay. So I wanted to read you actually this another little quote that I found. Love is the natural and divine part in us and resides within the heart. With it, we flourish, prosper, and unfold our unlimited potential. When we know and understand love, we share this energy with every particle of life. It gives purpose and meaning to our existence and provides the foundation for every thought, feeling, and action. It is always within us, whether we recognize it or not. And I really, really love that, because I feel like sometimes when we get down or get hard on ourselves, it feels like we just can't access it, or we desperately need love from somebody else because we just feel so crummy about ourselves that we can't access it from within. But the reality of it is that this idea of unconditional self-love, or just the practice of choosing self-love, creates so much more strength and confidence to try new things and to go after the things that are exciting and to explore the limits, the edges of your limits. Because like I said before, no matter what happens with the outcome, you're still willing to love and accept yourself no matter what. And all of a sudden, there's no more table stakes, because if you're loved and accepted no matter what unfolds, then what's holding you back from choosing anything, for dreaming even bigger, for kind of exploring everything that you've ever wanted in the world, and knowing that no matter what happens, it doesn't matter. I was I really hope that this class is resonate for people, but I don't know. But if I were so scared to even put it out there, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. And it's funny on a webinar thing, because you don't know, you can't see people's faces. I don't know how this is landing. Are you guys even still there? I'm not sure. And so it's a whole new paradigm for me. But the reality of it is that this is something that's helped me so much in so many places in my life, that if it can be any sort of light for you all, I want to put it out there and share it. And at the end of the day, this is my truth. And so if it resonates and benefits for you, that's awesome, but it doesn't actually change its value to me. That makes sense. So I'm actually doing this class primarily for me as an affirmation of what I know to be true, and bringing you guys into it. There's certainly the inner critic that's like, oh God, I hope they like it, and I hope they get what they need out of it. But I actually took 5 or 10 minutes to meditate before hopping on the call, and just call in and ask for divine guidance. May you all receive everything that you need. And kind of let go of putting the pressure on me to be the perfect deliverer of the exact information that you need in this moment. So I think that's where I want to pause. But I do want to offer you that Ho'oponopono that I promised. And so Ho'oponopono, it's Ho'oponopono. It's an ancient Hawaiian healing art that's been kind of modernized and translated into American or modern American culture, because Hawaii is technically part of America, but has traditional roots that go far beyond what our modern American culture is. And it's this idea that if we can accept and take responsibility for everything in our world, like everything that I see is actually, for me, and it's my responsibility on some level. And that if we can show up no matter what and clear any past hurts, that we will clear our energy field. And when we clear our energy field, then we walk in light and healing. And so I'm going to tell you, there's 4 lines to it. And I wanted to share it with you, but before I share the 4 lines, I want you to know that the words are actually directed at you. And this is actually something I use a lot when I'm feeling frustrated or agitated or impatient, especially with somebody else. But I actually start chanting this in my own head, but I'm directing it towards me, because it's not about me loving and forgiving the other person. It's about me loving and forgiving myself. And then that clears my energy to just be a clear vessel for whatever is happening. So the 4 lines are: I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you. So I just want you to go ahead and close your eyes with me, and you can repeat it out loud because you're all on mute, or to yourself. But really kind of imagine either yourself sitting in front of you, or if you can imagine you saying this to you, or maybe you say it to you as a little kid. But these 4 lines, and let's just repeat it 3 or 4 times. I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you. I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you. I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you. Just notice what that creates in your body, in your system. And sometimes I will shortcut this saying and just go, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Just reminding myself that it's okay that you're upset. It's okay that you're feeling sad. It's okay that you don't know what to do. It's okay that you're worried about falling on your face. It's okay that you're worried about money, whatever it is. And I can just show up. I love you, I love you. It's kind of like, with a kid, I got you. I'm right here. I say it to my son all the time. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Even though we've lived together his whole life, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. And I find myself telling that to myself more now too. I'm right here. No matter what, I will not abandon you. So that's what I wanted to end with. It's just that Ho'oponopono offering, and I love you, I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you. Just try it on, and over the next few weeks, and see if you can. And I always end up putting my hand on my heart. But even when you're in a meeting and you've got a bunch of other people, you can just start chanting it in your own head, or just like I said, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Like, I got your back. You've always got somebody on your side, on your team, and that person is unwavering, no matter what. So thank you all so much for joining me. I would love, love, love to hear any questions or stories or pieces that you might be getting, kind of stuck with, or examples in your own world. Anybody want to give enough space? I know it's intimidating to hop on with people we don't know, but this is how we will end up getting to know each other, is by sharing a little bit more of our story and about what's going on. Okay. Well, please, if you haven't already, join us in Facebook. If you're not a Facebooker, that's fine. Feel free to email me anytime. And I have some notes from my talk tonight, so I'll post a written document in addition to the copy of tonight's talk. Thank you all so very much for being here. I will email you later this week to let you know if we're going to keep the Tuesday evenings or if we'll switch to Monday morning. You're all very welcome. Thank you for being here. It's really, really special to me that you have chosen to take this time for yourself, and I'm beyond honored that you're choosing to spend it with me. And I know that the energy of the group, that we're all in this together. And so if we can reach out and support each other and connect with each other and cheer each other on, I think that the energy of all of this just keeps on growing. As far as the journal goes, if you want to, I don't want to create expectations and homework around the journal, but ideally you're choosing 1 or 2 questions maybe a week that you can spend a little bit of time journaling on. If journaling isn't something that you're used to, this is a good opportunity to jump in with some guided questions. I don't have any question in particular that I want you to do this week, but maybe if you pick a question, you want to share it with the group. You don't necessarily have to share your answers, you're welcome to, but I just want to know that you are engaging in this process in the weeks between our calls, because I did want to give plenty of room for you to kind of chew on these concepts because they're pretty big. Play with this new, like the Ho'oponopono tool, and then spend a little bit of time. Maybe it's a daily journaling. Like I said, maybe it's, you can find an hour a week where you pick one question, and even just sit and reflect with yourself. If you're not a big writer, maybe you want to do some art, or draw or color, or whatever you want to do. You always wanted to try watercolors, and nobody's ever going to see this. So now is your opportunity to check out something new and try it on. And as long as you will show up for yourself with love and support at the end of it, it doesn't matter what it looks like at the end. So go for it. Okay. If there's no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop for the evening, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks again so much for being here. Good night.